My name is Sam Jenks, and welcome to another episode of The Way We Source, a podcast hosted by Kodiak Hub, where we share our talks with procurement practitioners, leaders, experts, consultants, content gurus, and people that we find downright inspiring, diving into the role that sourcing and procurement plays in the way we live. If you like today's episode, make sure to rate the program and give us a follow. Today, I'm joined by Baszynski, head of procurement at Mercury. Bobby's path into procurement is anything but traditional, starting her career in the energy sector, negotiating large-scale land and M&A deals before making the leap into high-growth tech. She's been the first procurement hire at both Ramp and Mercury, building modern procurement functions from the ground up inside fast-scaling fintech environments. Bobby brings a sharp point of view on what strategic procurement actually looks like, why the function needs to move away from rigid category silos, and how procurement can and should earn a true seat at the table. Bobby, welcome to the show.
Excited to be here, Sam. Thank you for the amazing introduction. Sort of odd to hear it play back like that, just in terms of my journey and where I've come from.
Well, congrats. You've arrived, and I don't think that the way you source is necessarily arriving, but nonetheless, we're super happy to be able to have you. I think that it's awesome, the career path that you've taken, a non-traditional one, right? You started in energy and land deals and M&A. I mean, how did that shape maybe the way that you see procurement today?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely unorthodox. And I think, as we see with a lot of procurement professionals and leaders over the years, many of us sort of get here by accident, which I think is the cool part. And we bring a different lens through our experience. I'm also equally excited to see like more and more carved out paths of people coming through like supply chain intentionally. And I think a lot of that is obviously just programs being built out at universities and colleges, but also people seeing, in terms of like modern procurement and the needle being moved in traditional procurement sense, and that it is actually an exciting function to be a part of. So, yeah, to answer your question, Sam. So, I think ultimately my experience in the energy sector really taught me how to operate in uncertainty. In the energy sector, again, there's like a lot of macro factors outside of your control, and you have to learn to essentially have one arm behind your back at all times, whether it's market conditions, political
Right.
stuff that's going on, um, geological risk, not to mention just like operationally. And so you really have to sort of look around the corners and understand how these different facets ultimately shape what you do. So, prices can move quickly, the stakes are really high. And so, how do you really learn to operate in that environment? And so, what really taught me in terms of that background and then transposing that into procurement was just, ultimately relationships come first. I think that's the foundation of both of these roles that I've had, and that's sort of how I've leaned in heavily. As that is the forefront of how you do business, whether that's procurement or in the energy sector. So relationships first, and then they also have to be backed by operational precision. That matters. You have to set a very high bar in terms of how you operate. If you don't have like any one of your ducks in a row, like things can crumble very quickly. And so you learn to
Yeah.
anticipate those risks, not just like on the contract side, but just future looking to understand like, okay, what could go wrong here, and how do I build that into the contract or into my process more broadly. So it really, again, it's anticipating risk before it actually shows up. I think those skills translated naturally, and quite frankly, I didn't really have a problem moving in from the energy sector into procurement. It was sort of like a natural progression for me.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that something you hit on there is like the element of relationships, but also uncertainty, and how building strong relationships. And of course, as you mentioned as well, strong mechanisms into agreements, whether that be, for example, SLAs or different types of contingencies and elements of continuity, can be able to help navigate when a market becomes uncertain or, ambiguous or vulnerable. I mean, a lot of people say that we're in a VUCA market, and I think a lot of businesses have been feeling it during 2024, 2025. What does that mean for you in procurement, like being in a VUCA market? Like how does one have to navigate that might differ from a more stable period in time?
Definitely. I mean, again, this really speaks to the procurement has got to, look macro, and really understand
Mm.
like those geopolitical risks and other things, other headwinds that are potentially going to impact what you do. So it's really looking at what your business that you're operating in and anticipating, what could come your way. Like what is the worst case scenario? And again, you don't want to be a doomsdayer, but it's just like,
No.
whether it's tariffs or, interest rates and different things that could impact you. How do you safeguard from the procurement side? So that's on the contracting side, looking at who your partners are, what could go wrong there. It's really, it's difficult to do. And so you really have to do the best you can to have that crystal ball foresight to go, okay, like if this goes really off the rails, what's possible here and what is my contingency plan? So safeguarding in your contract,
Mm.
maybe you have a backup vendor that you could potentially use, or supplier, different things that different levers you could pull that, will protect you. But it's difficult to do. I mean, I was in those situations in the energy sector too, where you get a wild swing in the price of oil, and before you know it, your economics are very different than what you had planned, and the planning cycles are just so large or long in the energy sector. It's like 5 years of work. All of a sudden, okay, now we have to put this on the shelf and go focus somewhere else. And so, um, there have been situations in the energy sector where I've been able to backstop in the agreement,
Mm.
different levers that give us an out. So like we're at least we're financially protected, should those scenarios arise, knowing that again, there's only so much within your control.
How has that transition been? Because obviously working at Ramp and Mercury, I assume then the majority of spend is actually then going into elements like software as well as then services. Now I'm not necessarily, in those businesses, but I could just assume based upon the nature of the businesses that those are some of the largest spend categories. Am I correct by assuming as much?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
So how does that then shift back over into the space of buying services? Like how have you seen that differentiation? Like in a market, they're buying, of course, raw material, something that could swing quite significantly. How does that kind of translate into software and services that you're purchasing a lot of today?
Yes, good call. Definitely a different, just in terms of like direct versus indirect purchasing. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think the big call out here, and it's quite obvious, is the speed factor, right? Like you can move a
Mm.
lot quicker on the indirect side versus the direct. There's a lot more when you're buying raw goods and different inputs. You can iterate a lot faster, on software or services, but that opens a whole other Pandora's box of risk, right? Like, and I know we're probably going to get there later in the podcast, but AI, and we're seeing a lot of
Mm.
these vendors pop up, and hey, we're an AI vendor, and like they got this new flashy product, and they're popping up left, right, and center. And how do you
Yeah.
differentiate between like who's well backed and a good financial starting position versus somebody that maybe is bootstrapped and is a little bit more risky, and how do you make that gamble and that risk, at what part of your stack can you potentially make a table stakes bet to go, okay, well, this company might not be around next year, but we're willing to hedge that bet. So that
Mm.
sort of feeds into how you think about your tech stack and making sure that your core mission critical vendors are maybe a little bit more financially sound, and you've done your due diligence and you can afford to take
Yeah.
some bets. So it's really looking at your portfolio of services and providers to make sure that you've got a balance there and that you don't have all your eggs in one basket, or that something could go critically wrong, should you have the wrong vendor and the wrong problem you're trying to solve for.
You brought up something that's super interesting here: the risk appetite of procurement, and whether it be, for example, in the services or software spend category, or for example, the raw material or finished goods categories, right? If you're looking at directs contra the indirects, at what point in time do you think that it's like viable for a procurement organization to have that risk appetite to go and work with a growth venture, or like what are your views on that? I'm just curious from your side.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it sort of feeds into like exactly what problem you're trying to solve for, depending on what they do.
Mm.
Obviously, contract value matters. So, a $10,000 purchase versus a $250,000 purchase, that matters as well, just in terms of your appetite.
Sure. Sure.
And then I think finally the other piece is just our ROI. Like one thing I like to obviously press on, even when we're bringing on new vendors or services, is what is that anticipated ROI?
Mm,
What happens if this goes really well? And then playing the contrarian, what happens if this goes poorly? And
mm,
what is that total cost of ownership? Because I think that's the other link here as well, outside of just contract value of there's implementation and time and resources that you have to
yeah.
invest in some of these partnerships. And so on its head, maybe it's a $250,000 contract, but it's actually more like $1 million when you think about your AWS and time and resources internally from the team. What are they being pulled off of to do this? So you really have to look at that TCO, and that's where I think some procurement pros potentially miss the mark or can be blind to, of like making sure you're looking
Yeah.
holistically at these vendors and the disruption that it can cause on your business.
Very well said. I think the interesting thing also is like in this age of AI, we're all evaluating vendors that have more, how do I say, risk in their profiles, right? Almost all of the vendors are growth vendors. And to be able to do innovative things, we have to swing a little bit bigger. And I think that that's maybe not necessarily in the nature of a traditional procurement function as well, which makes your inputs and your insights really interesting, obviously being in a few greenfield positions. Now, we're going to get a little bit to that. I'm excited. We're 10 minutes in, and I haven't even asked you a single question off of the question list. Let's get into things. This is awesome. So a lot of people say that like they fall into the procurement role, right? I was actually curious because I want to go back to your background in energy and M&A. What do you think are some of the things that you take from that background that almost like become an unfair advantage for you today? And then what are some of the other kind of skills that you feel like you've kind of gained along the way now being in the space of procurement?
Definitely. So I think, yeah, to sort of to take a step back, um, stepping into the energy sector, I actually started as like a contracts lineman. So I was drafting agreements pretty early on, and it's
Mm,
again the energy sector is a little bit of a different animal in that regard. Sort of acting in a sense as a lawyer and really building in these terms to whether it's a farm out pooling participation agreement, where there's multiple parties involved, and like I said, you have to have the agreement safeguarded for risk. So
mm,
that really taught me like commercial intuition, like to understand like what's on paper and how does that actually translate. And I think this is where like a lot of like procurement pros can really set themselves apart, is understanding that contractual piece, because it is intrinsically tied to the deal, and
yeah.
you need that foundation of knowledge. And I see it time and time again, unfortunately, where like that feedback loop is a little bit weak.
Mm,
So I would encourage again procurement pros to really like dig in there and make sure that like you're understanding your agreements, because that is the foundation of everything we're doing when we're negotiating. The second piece I would say is negotiation muscle. Obviously, spending 15 years in the energy sector, negotiating multi-million-dollar deals, whether that was a land deal or an M&A deal, probably touched close to $1 billion worth of deals. And so you learn to build out that muscle really quickly, especially when there's table stakes and a lot of capital intensive initiatives on the table. And then that feeds into like comfort with ambiguity. I
mm,
sort of touched on that in the intro, but learning to operate in uncertainty and just like volatile conditions and the wild swings in the price of oil. And you have a politician come out and say one thing, and then your whole program gets sidetrailed, or there's new
yeah.
regulations that come out, and like all of a sudden, what you're trying to do is not actually viable. And
Mm,
so, um, you really have to learn to think on your feet and pivot and pivot
yeah.
and pivot and pivot. Um, and then finally, I would say just like executive presence. Like I sat across the boardroom table from a lot of CEOs, and executives in high positions, and so I learned to be comfortable with that. And
Yeah.
it wasn't easy, but I know how leadership thinks, and like where the pushback ultimately comes from. And so that has allowed me to really, again, I think be pretty successful in terms of pivoting careers from, totally different industry into procurement. In terms of like what I had to learn, so obviously, and you called it out earlier, is tech companies operate differently.
Yeah.
And a lot quicker. So you all of a sudden go from like, more direct procurement, slow lead times to, hey, we need this tomorrow and like we need to move quick. And so it was getting my head around like how these tech companies actually operate. I mean, business is business. Um, you know, the framework is there across, depending on the industry, it's all the same, but there's nuances there, obviously. And so it really, I had to step change and go, okay, like, wow, we're like hair straight back here. And I have to get comfortable with that. And then the other piece is just like stakeholder choreography. Like in the energy sector, you're sort of moving towards the same goal at the end of the day. Let's say you're developing a new resource play. You have your engineer and your geologist, and I was the landman, obviously, and you're all in lockstep towards, hey, we need to get this resource out of the ground and get it to market, and get our payout on this well.
Mm.
Whereas internally at a tech company, there's often competing priorities. Design needs a new platform, and maybe your people team needs a services contract with a consultant, and so all of a sudden you have competing priorities within an organization. And so it's really like, okay, how do I actually choreograph this so that the business keeps moving? And then finally, just like process design that actually scales as a part of that, as a part of moving quickly and having competing priorities. How
Mm.
do you actually structure something that makes sense?
Mm.
um, again, operating very differently from an oil and gas company. How does that actually translate into moving the business forward in a tech organization?
Some awesome things there that you shared. One of the things that I think that you hit upon that I want to double back to was this element of commercial intuition that I think dovetails into like the negotiation muscle, right? So it's that creativity in the deal, as you mentioned before, but also just that muscle, that muscle memory to be able to go and get a deal done. But understanding, that red lines are something you can get past, that that the end state is a collaboration between buyer and supplier, right? And I think that is a really interesting topic that I'd love to just double click on really quickly. Do you, as somebody that comes from a sector where negotiation was, second nature, and of course something were able to carry over into procurement, do you have any kind of tactical tips for people that are trying to work out that particular muscle, on how it is that you sharpened your negotiation muscle, whether that be, for example, frameworks you use, um, assets or resources, books, podcasts, and alike that have coached you along the way? Just in the same way that, for example, a salesperson might say, "Yeah, sure, I've read Challenger Sale and used the MedPick, kind of qualification framework." Is there anything that's really stuck out for you? Excuse me, when it comes to like negotiation muscle.
Yeah, definitely. And I love this topic. Negotiating is a very big passion of mine. So let's go there, Sam. Yeah, so I think, like I said earlier on, really understanding your contracts, and that's what was taught to me before I even flexed my negotiation muscle, is
Mm,
understanding these agreements. And if it's SaaS, getting at least a baseline and understanding. There's usually five different models in terms of like how SaaS companies operate, whether it's per seat
right,
usage, some combination, and we have the AI token challenge that we're all dealing with. So understanding like the different pricing mechanics of who you're actually going to be dealing with, that is
right.
foundational. How are you going to negotiate until you have that understanding? Once you have an understanding of like how a contract works, it's really again like sitting down and thinking, okay, like what could go seriously wrong here, and what do I need to safeguard against when I'm negotiating? Um, should our hiring plans change? Maybe we need to slash 20 seats down the road. Can we add in some sort of safety valve that allows us to do that? Maybe it's the contrary problem, like that I face with both at Ramp and Mercury, of we're growing like a rocket ship here. How do I safeguard this contract so that finance isn't breathing down my neck in 6 months' times because we're being hit with overages, we outgrow our contract, it doesn't scale. So really thinking about how your business is moving and how you would functionally operate within the bounds of that agreement. So that would be first and foremost, just in terms of like baselining understanding. The other piece is Preparation. So many people think negotiation is just a point in time and you get on a call with a vendor or supplier and it's, hey, you beat them up on price, get me to here, da 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 da. And it's just that
Yeah.
dance. And no, like procurement is, there are frameworks and it's a process. And it starts with preparation.
Mm,
Like time and time again, I see so many people fall short in terms of you don't even understand what you want at the end of the negotiation. So it's really going into these
mm.
situations with prep and understanding of like, okay, again, foresight of what do I need? What do they potentially need? What are some questions that I have? I never like to go into a first call and start swinging and going, give me a discount and do. It's like understand them again, bringing it back to the relationships and the people. Like, help me understand
Mm.
your pricing model. Like, this is how I'm thinking about it. Like, tell me how we could get creative here and like having those conversations.
Is starting with the end in mind and prepping from that perspective. That's really, yeah.
100%. Yeah, and like again, really chunking it out into different milestones instead of just like
Mm,
I think the overwhelm comes from like, oh, I got to get on this call and like it's super overwhelming. It's like no, like again, baseline understanding, go into the call prep, knowing what you likely want, do your market research perhaps as part of that,
yeah.
getting on the call, having that at least exploratory piece, and then taking it away and then recalibrating. I would say it's like
Mm,
prep, get on the call, walk away, recalibrate,
yeah.
and do it again. Um, and it takes practice. It's a game of like going to bat,
Yeah.
honestly.
Mm,
The first couple times you have to go toe to toe with somebody, it's uncomfortable. Nobody wants to talk about price and ultimately disagreement or misalignment in terms of what you both want. But I think that's the fun of it of like, let's just talk. Like you tell me what's important to you. I'll tell you what's important to me. Let's have a conversation. This doesn't need to be combative. I know I have to give to get. And I think that's where like some negotiators can get a bad name. It's just like so there's a winner and there's a loser. No, it's and again, it's cliche and I hate it too, but there can be a win-win. Or at least a good outcome for both parties. I would say the
yeah.
sign of a good negotiation is both parties walk away a little bit disappointed with the outcome.
Yeah.
I think that is first and foremost is just like just practice and keep it human and um, also keep the relationship as like your first priority. You could get 50% discount or the best pricing in the world, but if your relationship suffers,
Yeah.
that is far worse in my opinion, just in terms of like downstream impact. You have to work with this party, for hopefully a long time. And if you sever that,
Yeah.
I've seen situations where you could potentially ruin the relationship and the
Mm.
implementation maybe goes horribly. The contract is signed and they walked away and, you never hear from them again. So it's really being thoughtful about that piece as well. And then just in terms of like frameworks, I mean, I've sort of built my own framework, Sam. I know there's a lot of material out there, and I've been lucky enough to, have some training along the way. I know like Negotiation Ninja. Um, we sat down with him when I was in the energy sector, and we did like video and like looking at different facial expressions and like how to position. So I did get some baseline, but a lot of it is just like school of the hard knocks. Like just try it out, see what works for you. Chris Voss is a great, I mean, resource. Never Split the Difference. That is one of my favorite books, and he's got some great podcasts and material. And again, he really feeds into the human side of it that I like about him and leading with empathy, and getting those good outcomes and really thinking about tactics like mirroring and things that you can do that actually work.
Awesome. A lot to take away from there. And I think that to double back to where we started, obviously, kind of understanding the model, understanding what safeguards are in place and you need to put in place, not becoming a barrier to the deal, but also trying to align with your stakeholders and choreograph that early, prepping and starting with the end in mind, and also making sure that you don't lose out on like continuing to be a customer of choice, right? By damaging that relationship. That was some of the things that I took away from that. And I think that all incredibly interesting takes, and it would be the same side of it would be the other side of the coin, and that would be my same kind of, I would say, approach when selling a deal, right? And I think that that's also what one needs to remember is that you are ultimately kind of two sides of the exact same coin going after the exact same thing. What I think that you mentioned that is interesting is like, it's not about win-win. And yes, that could be cliche, but it's that one thing you said that I want everybody to take away is that each party should walk away from the deal just a little bit disappointed. And I think that that's actually the sign of a really good negotiation, right? A fact that everybody was working towards the same thing. Sure, you didn't get absolutely everything, but when should you or do you, right? So great insights. Thank you so much for that, Bobby. If you had to boil down, because I can tell that you're a person of systems and frameworks, right? It's very obvious from the just speaking to you very, very briefly now. If you had to boil down like kind of a playbook for when you jump into a new role, because you've done it now at Ramp, you've done it at Mercury, right? You've built from that greenfield zero that I think a lot of people want to be able to experience at some point in time. Not everybody has the chance to. Say that somebody does, what is kind of your absolute must hit, must do first 30, 60, 90?
Totally. Yeah, and I mean, you say playbook, Sam, and, I don't think there is a playbook. I mean, at Ramp, again,
Mm,
I was hired at Employee 100, a very different landscape in terms of at Mercury, I was, Employee 850, so, you know, more of a startup environment at Ramp versus Mercury. It's like, hey, there's established norms and culture, and I'm being parachuted into
yeah.
a totally different ecosystem. And I, quite frankly, had to throw my whole playbook out the window, within the first 30 days, because I was like, hey, well, clearly what happened at Ramp or what worked there doesn't here, because I'm no longer scaling with the organization and putting those guardrails in place as we scale. The
Mm,
company's there, and now all of a sudden I have to
right.
come in, and sort of write this as I go. So, having said that, there are some sort of non-negotiables that I think translate well into both environments. First and foremost, within the first 30 days, and again, this is where I think a lot of procurement programs can fail, is getting too tactical too quickly. So really like going slower to go faster, and not coming in like a wrecking
Mm,
ball and going, oh, we need process
mm,
and we need procedures and do policies, like everybody's favorite P words, procurement policies and process. Like, no, like just like
yeah.
pump the brakes. Like the first
Mm,
30 days at Mercury, I just sat down with people and I listened, from C-suite all the way down to the IC level, and really understanding, okay, like where are the pain points, what's not working,
yeah.
really seeking to understand the business, and the culture even. Okay, of like, okay, what does change look like here? Because you're really a change management expert as well, of coming in as procurement.
Yeah.
And you have to be mindful of that, because the culture component can be sort of like turning around the Titanic. That is the harder thing to change. So taking that first 30 days to take a step back, the next 30 days, I would really, again, continue to like listen, build trust, with your
Mm,
stakeholders, and really, let them know your vision. I always like to operate in the open. And I think that comes from my
mm,
Ramp experience, is we very much had this philosophy of, hey, everything is open in Slack. We're super transparent in terms of what we're doing. And that's how I operate. It was like, okay, this is my roadmap. Like, this is my vision.
oh,
Again, thinking
interesting.
about the end in mind, of like, this
Right.
is what I want this to be. And I don't see this as like a gatekeeping function. I really want to be strategic and moving the business along. So, as part of that, it's also, where's your spend coming from? Who are your vendors? That's important as well, as just in terms of understanding the people side. You need to understand the business side, and you know who are our key partners,
Yeah.
and what does that spend profile actually look like? Do we have a SaaS crawl problem? That was an issue at Mercury. It was like, okay,
Mm,
it's been the wild west here for a couple of years, and people are just going to buy what they need. So understanding that landscape,
yeah. Right.
and then how does the business make money? Because obviously that translates directly into procurement and what you're probably going to be buying and moving through. And so you need to have foresight into that. Again, with the strategic procurement mindset of, you're not just here to be a checklist function. It's like you want to move the business along, and that's imperative.
The thing that I just wanted to hit on is that you're talking right now about procurement from a perspective of having vision, and you haven't spoken once about savings. You're talking about making money, right? And I think that there's such an interesting take within that is so opposite to the mindset that so many people have of, like you said, the gatekeeper, right, function. And it's just a totally different twist on how can the procurement function operate as well.
Totally. I love that you called that out, Sam, because cost savings are it's the bane of my existence, and I think it's yes, it will forever be a key KPI for a procurement function. That's just the way it is. Having said that, it's a good barometer, but it shouldn't be. It's not the full value proposition. And again, that's where we sort of move from traditional procurement mindset to strategic.
Mm,
Of you can have both, like yes, but like I always think like, what does cost savings actually tie back to though? Like just because you're slashing costs, that doesn't translate into value. How are you actually moving the business forward? And so, I mean, I used cost savings as a KPI here at Mercury, and saved millions of dollars last year. And everybody go, "Oh, that's amazing." I'm like, "Yeah, that's good, but like, where did procurement actually show up and help drive revenue and
mm,
help move the business forward?" I sort of think of myself more as like a business development professional than I do even procurement. And I've had actually sellers say that to me, like, you do not think or act like a regular procurement person. I'm like, I think that feeds into my background, but it's also the philosophy that I've taken of just like, you know, and where procurement has gotten a bad name, quite frankly,
yeah.
is just it's this cost cutting function. And I mean, I even candidly had skeptics when I first joined Mercury, and they're just like, "Oh my god, procurement's here! Like, why
Right.
are we hiring procurement? Like, oh,
Right.
they're going to slash and take away all our tools." And I was like, "No, no, no! Like,
And let's be honest, there is an aspect there, and you touched upon it, right? Like reducing that maverick spend. There's too much of it. Rogue spend happens in every single business, particularly when you're kind of building that rocket ship in flight and things are moving fast and you're breaking stuff. And there's a lot of people that are trying to work all and run up the same side of the mountain, but sometimes people take different routes there, right? And I think that happens. Where I'm in a growth venture myself, I understand the stakes that happens there. With that being said, it is about the business development side of things. I want to dig deeper into that because that's such an interesting perspective, and that is truly, I think, also, and I agree with you that one of the ways in which procurement can get strategic. What is it that you try and identify, like tactically? What are some examples, if you could share with us, both at Ramp but also at Mercury now that you're in your position, that you truly believe that you've been able to impact the top line, and how did you go about those particular initiatives or things of that sort, just to really bring our listeners into your world and something a little bit more concrete, if you don't mind.
definitely." Yeah, I mean, I think this goes back to like my first 30 days, and when I sat down with each business unit to really understand of like, what's your motives?
Mm,
Um, I guess it sort of feeds into me wanting to not impose my mold onto you, but what are you
mm,
driving towards?
yeah.
So let's use a revenue organization as an example. That's something we're really digging into here at Mercury. And okay, how can we increase our selling motion and
Mm,
really capture more customers? And so we're making a
mm,
lot of investments, pricey investments. And of course, in procurement, I'm like, oh, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, do we want to be making some of these bets? Like, um, you know, there's a high cost rate to this. But on the flip side, there's potentially a really large ROI. And so while I might
yeah.
not necessarily agree with all the initiatives we're doing, the strategic component comes into moving out of the way and going, okay, like this is the art of it. And I've had to step away from some things that it's like, okay, I don't necessarily agree, but like I see what we're trying to do here and move the business forward. So I'm not going to be a gatekeeper here and block this. So that is, like I said, the biggest takeaway for me is just learning when just to step away, and not everything needs procurement at full throttle. It's really being tactical of like, where do I need to inject myself, and where can I sort of take a step back and be, less involved. So it's really like calculating, those steps. And
Right.
when at both Ramp and Mercury, I mean, we're rocket ships. We're moving at a very fast clip, and things are going to break. And you know, um, you really have to like have that like balancing art of trade-offs. And being explicit with people as well of, okay, like we're going to move quickly here, but this is like the trade-off,
Mm.
and help and understanding the or explaining the why to your stakeholders of like, okay, this is maybe not the best call, but like I'm willing to like stand down on this, but like let's come to a mutual agreement here in terms of like what that those trade-offs are.
I think that the thing that you hit on here is like starting with, again, sitting down with the stakeholders, understanding what is their end state, sharing your vision, but also understanding theirs. You mentioned something about like the bets that are being taken, and I think that any kind of business that is mirroring what we're doing at Kodiak, and you have big strategic bets that you're taking on a year by year basis, and you typically work within that OKR framework. Like, what are your big objectives for the year, right? What are the things that you're going to be working towards, and how can I be able to be somebody that accelerates those things rather than, again, blocks those things, and not looking at the cost out of the door to reach towards those bets as line items, but otherwise, areas in which are building towards something, which is then achieving a potential strategic bet in the business, right? And I think that, again, another way in which aligning yourself with the stakeholder group allows then procurement to become much more strategic. Now, I want to talk a little bit about your procurement org, because we talked about it in the prep that you're intentionally now kind of moving away from a more traditional category ownership, correct?
Correct.
Okay, very interesting. So I want to get into this. The generalist approach, right? You know, end to end business partners are the future. I guess if you would look at it like this, why do you believe that is the future?
Yeah, I love this topic, and I know it's probably going to be a spicy one for a lot of people, but I mean, ultimately, businesses don't operate in categories, so why should procurement? Um, again, it feeds into my point around just like molding procurement to the business. And I think that's where like
Mm.
traditional procurement does get its reputation, unfortunately, of operating in silos. And, this is the balance in terms of what I do and not being that business development individual. To me, when you move towards more like more business partners end to end, creates better ownership, which creates better outcomes for the organization, but also like your procurement team. Like I'm building a team now, and that's top of mind for me. Of I want people interested, and I want them to own that end to end piece. Like maybe you're partnering with the engineering team and the design team, and you really understand their stack from end to end, and you're not just managing a certain aspect of it. You have full ownership, and you're a partner. To me, that's going to lead for much better outcomes. And again, it moves you into that strategic motion versus we just sit in categories. So it's tough to do. Like we'll see when this comes to fruition as I continue to build out my team and see, okay, like where do we need to pivot. And I definitely have that foresight to know that, okay, like maybe there's even a hybrid solution here, as especially as we continue to scale and grow. I think that's the other component to this discussion is what's your maturity, and what works for 1,000 employees may not work for 10,000. And so I may eat my words on that,
We hope you won't have to, Bobby,
right?
of course. We hope you won't have to. But I actually am interested on that point, right? Like, when does this model break? Because what you are talking about is of course a more full-fledged A to Z representative from the procurement team. And that of course takes also a particular individual, right? Uh, dare I say, a more talented individual maybe than somebody that is a specialist in one aspect. That is also a very talented individual, but in two very different ways, right? A specialist is talented at a thing, right? The generalist is again the jack of all trades, and maybe in some cases that might create a situation where you have masters of none, right? I guess, just to not to challenge the thought, but just really to get behind it, where do you think that the model might break down?
Totally.
Have you thought about that?
Definitely. And I mean, it's a good call out, Sam. I mean, even from, I'm going through a hiring process right now. And to your point, it is feels like a unicorn hiring exercise because I am looking for that person that can
Mm.
be gritty and roll up their sleeves and do, any number of things. Um, but I definitely do think there's sort of a breaking point there. And I say generalist, but I also think you still need a core skill set. And I'll use myself as an example, and not to say that I'm a unicorn, but I do think I
Sure.
am pretty good at juggling a lot of plates. I'm a negotiator by trade, as we all know. Like that is my forte. Um, and along the way, I'm a pretty good operator, and have a lot of some of the other foundational aspects that you need from a good procurement pro. So I think there still needs to be, like, whether it's operations that's your forte, negotiations, whatever that is, I do still think you need something that you are a master of. Otherwise, yet to your point, I just don't think that works. Um, but yeah, I mean, to answer your question, it does break, I think, at scale. Again, that's sort of my sort of question in my head is, okay, what is it, an employee marker, maturity marker, like industry, how does that feed into that? Where you may have to look at maybe a combination, like I said, a hybrid of, like, you have some generalists, but you all have specialists. I think the other piece is more specialized industries, depending on what kind of goods you're purchasing
Mm,
it. If it's direct raw goods, maybe you need to have somebody that's a little bit more, expertise,
mm,
in terms of that realm. So the other sort of
yeah.
flavor that I would throw in here too, Sam, is like AI. Like, how is
Mm,
AI going to shift the procurement model? We're sort of at that greenfield space right now of we're all trying to figure out how AI is going to feed into the structure of procurement teams. So moving from category to, like, more business partner type mentality, and then you throw in AI, like, okay, this whole none of these models could really work. Like, we could sit down in 5 years and it could be something entirely different.
I think that we saw that already, right? You sit down 6 months ago, and I don't think that the adoption was there that it is today. And you sat down 6 months before that, and I think that it's moving at such a rapid pace at the moment. Let's get into the topic because you just mentioned it. The two letters, we have to talk about it every podcast, at least 3 to 5 minutes. It is what it is, but I'm actually interested in your take. Jokes aside, okay? Everyone's talking about it. You know, are you skeptical to AI? And if so, why? If not, I'm sure that there might be some, how would I say, remnants of skepticism, which we all should have. But where does AI help and where does it fall short?
Definitely. I'm a skeptic, for sure. With AI, I think it's been overhyped, and especially you hear people, lately, in the media even, it's like, oh, like, you know, 70% of jobs are going to be wiped out by 2030. And, this is super scary. I think AI is a tool. And that is the key part of this, is it's can definitely help, especially in terms of, like, some of the operational grind work, automating some of
Mm,
the redundant, like, admin type work, contract reviews, dashboards, things like that. Where it
yeah.
doesn't, um, sort of solve any problems, is like relationships and people
Mm,
and judgment, and, reading a room and looking around corners to see what that risk can be potentially. And I think AI is actually
mm,
going to really
mm,
shine a light on procurement pros, and, like, we're going to have to step up our game, because all of a sudden, when you start to remove some of the redundant,
mm.
operational, grindy type tasks, it's going to shine a light on us. And, like, who's good at forming relationships and business development, and, having that judgment and that gut call that, like, an LLM just won't have. So I think the procurement leaders of the future, the ones that will set themselves apart, will be able to balance both. And how do we integrate AI in an
Right.
intentional way that supplements what we already do, while allowing the human element to really prevail and be showcased?
Love that input. And also the removal of the low value tasks, like you said, will shine a light on procurement's ability to be able to be strategic, right? And again, that gets back to where we started the conversation surrounding the elements of commercial intuition that you brought with yourself from your last path in the energy sector into procurement, right? That intuition and creativity is something that the LLM will not be able to recreate. But I like your approach, and you're also you're bringing up an interesting topic, right? Will we as individuals level up in the age of AI, right? Because it's going to remove the manual and low value tasks that otherwise have been bogging us down. And it's an interesting concept nonetheless. So thank you for sharing your perspective on it. I think that we could be able to talk for a very long time. I would love to be able to start rounding out. And before I do, I'm curious, if you were to look back, at your start of your career into procurement, and you were able to give yourself one piece of advice, what would that be?
Oof, there's a lot. Um, be patient. I think that's the big one. I have a high bar for excellence, and
Mm,
even at my time in Mercury, I'm coming up on a year now. And I can be hard on myself because, I have, amazing vision in terms of like where I want to take this program and this function.
mm.
But it's a game of inches, and it's really, you know, again, knowing when to step back. It's like, okay, this is going to take a little bit longer than I thought, and that's okay. Um, so that has been the biggest challenge, and the advice that I would give myself is to take your time. It's okay. You want to get it right. Again, there's nothing worse than, like I said, getting too tactical too quickly and thinking you have to move mountains. The way of future procurement and being strategic is keeping it simple and doing less. And I think that's ultimately the sweet spot.
Great insights. Thank you so much, Bobby, for coming and just dropping some knowledge. And also, I think, I typically say to guests that I want to try and inspire and educate our listeners. And thank you for inspiring our listeners today with today's episode. More than anything, I think that it was an uplifting conversation and gives a lot of insight into what procurement can be when we maybe break out of our shell in a lot of ways. So thank you for that. Much appreciated. Before I let you go, I want to be able to do a quick fire round, which we do with a lot of our guests. A few questions. I would love one word or one sentence answers. It's not going to be about yourself as a procurement professional. Well, maybe there might be one or two things thrown in there, but more so than anything, quick fire questions. Sound like a plan?
Let's do it.
All right. You are in procurement, but you also have worked at some high growth tech companies. So I am curious, are you a Mac or a PC person?
Mac.
Okay. So the tech person is coming through there for sure.
Yes.
Understood.
It's a
Okay.
hot button.
Gotcha. All expenses paid trip. You're leaving tomorrow. Kodiak's floating the bill. You can go by yourself or with friends and family. Where are you headed?
South of France.
Okay, very exciting. Any particular reason why?
I mean, I just love the culture and the food, and the vibe. Yeah,
That's good enough for me. The vibe. Perfect.
and the wine.
Um, indeed. Procurement in 2026 is, finish that sentence.
Oof. On the edge of change.
Hmm. And I think that people like you are going to be changing it, Bobby. So thank you so much for taking the time to be able to chat with us. This was an awesome episode. I'm curious if people want to be able to get in touch with you or learn more about what you're doing and or just be a part of your network. What's the best way to do so?
Well, I appreciate you having me on, Sam. This was a great jam session. I hope we can do it again. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active. I'm putting out more and more content as well, just in terms of uh, what it's like to be a builder and things that I've learned. So definitely
Hmm.
follow along there and reach out via DM and LinkedIn. I'm constantly checking it. So yeah, excited to make any connections.
Awesome. And hopefully you get that trip to the south of Spain soon, or sorry, the south of France soon as well. Thank you again for being on.
Appreciate it, Sam.